Dear participants, dear delegates, please take your seats. We are going to continue with the second plenary session right now. We promise you there will be a break later on, and you're going to have a great opportunity to discuss what's happening here on stage and to do the networking and to meet each other. For the moment, I'm going to ask you all, please take your seats. Okay.
Hello and good morning to everyone. If I could just ask you to take your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to be here. My name is Vivian NICOLI from CDPQ. Maybe I'll just start actually by explaining who we all are on the panel and why we're talking about regulation. I think, first of all, I'd like to actually introduce the panelists, Marie-Ange from Keolis, Christine JEANDEL from Colisée, and Gwendoline CAZENAVE from Eurostar. These three companies are in the portfolio of CDPQ, and so this is why I thought it would be particularly interesting to reunite actually these three CEOs. First and foremost, they are all three formidable and impressive CEOs in their own right and on their own standing, but I thought it would be particularly interesting to reunite the three of them to speak today. They all know each other, and so I thought it would be a very interesting panel to actually have them speak together, and on a particular topic that is, for me, really important, which is regulation. To me, regulation is really the heart of infrastructure. So I thought this would be a particularly interesting topic to speak on. And of course, regulation is key to ensuring that we ensure that energy transition to net zero in 2050. And in this vein, I thought this would be a great topic to reunite these three CEOs. So maybe without further ado, I'll just launch actually into the questions. I will leave some time at the end for any questions from the audience. So please, during this speech, think of some things, some interesting questions for our CEOs. And if there are none, we'll, in any case, continue talking. Maybe actually to launch the panel, I'll actually ask Marie-Ange to actually address the question of public transport. Of course, public transport is key in ensuring energy transition and key in ensuring the success of energy transition. So maybe the first question is, whether you think that the efforts at the national and local levels are sufficient in ensuring energy transition, specifically the support for trams, buses, etc., electric vehicles.
Thank you very much, Vivian. Tough question, very broad to start. Good morning to all of you. I would say public transport is obviously key in the energy transition for at least two reasons. First, and it's the key concept of, sorry for the jargon, but for what we call the modal shift, how we are going to convince people to drop their cars, because today you should keep in mind that 85% of the trips are made by cars. So public transport remain a very small part of all the mobility. So we are at the very beginning of the modal shift, and through the modal shift you are going to have one element, which is the avoided emissions coming from the individual car, and second, we are also at the very beginning of the energy transition of the public transport. Buses, coaches in most of the countries remain fossil at this stage. They will move to electric vehicles in the coming years. Big part in the case of Keolis, we have already 45% of our passengers which who are using metro or tram, so electric means, but we still have 55% of our passengers who are on board of buses and coaches. So the modal shift is going to be key because it's going to avoid a lot of emissions. And the road emissions or the mobility emissions represent the first sector. 30% of greenhouse gas emissions come from the transport, the mobility. 95% come from individual cars or trucks. But it's clear that the first level, the first source of emission comes from the mobility. And if you look at the recent figures published quite recently, most of the other sectors have reduced their emissions for the past 3 or 5 years. It's not the case of public transport, not because we are not making a lot of efforts, but because you have more and more people asking for public transport. So when you look, or asking for mobility, so when you look at the question of the public transport, two key elements to keep in mind. First of all, we collectively, the mobility represent the first activity or the first segment of operations, the most emissive one, first point. And the key element to answer that is going to move the big part of the emissions which come from the cars to public transport. And I strongly believe that we are at the very beginning of the evolution or the revolution of public transport, which will attract more and more people because it's going to avoid emissions and it's going to avoid congestion, because we forgot sometimes the major impact of congestion, especially after 2 or 3 years of COVID, where congestion was slightly done. So that's really the key element of the energy transition.
Thank you, Marie-Ange. Maybe actually turning to Gwendoline, from actually intra-city transport to high-speed trains. Gwendoline, I mean, how is your reaction? What are your thoughts in terms of actually whether enough has been done to ensure a modal shift towards high-speed rail?
Yeah, thank you, Marie-Ange, for this modal shift in turn of cities. So I will talk about more international and cross-border modal shift and transport. As you may know, for 30 years, Eurostar and Thalys have raised 380 million passengers, travelers with generation, crossing borders and traveling across 5 countries. And now it's about, Marie-Ange was talking about this, it's about going further. How do we go further? We have merged Eurostar and Thalys. We are building this backbone of sustainability travel in Europe. And the thing is, for this new company to create further value for its customers and to grow sustainable travel, to reach our objective of 30 million passengers in 2030, to allow this modal shift from road and air. It's how do we do that? How do we go further now? So I would say there are 3 things. The first thing is about growing the offer, being more and more frequent, having high frequency trains and frequencies between these big cities, big European cities, Paris, London, Amsterdam, Brussels and Köln. So it's about really growing this and having a modal shift from air and road to railways between these big cities. And it's also our project, and my strong belief is that these city centers, these railway city centers, will become what I call open hubs. It means, like as we see it in Japan, these hubs will be hubs to connect our European railways backbone to domestic railways, which gives customers the opportunity to have many more destinations. This is the first thing, so a big European network connected to domestic networks, and it's really what we're working on. And second thing, to connect it to airports, to airlines. Because, you know, we need to think different with airlines. Yes, there is this, definitely this model shift we need on short hauls, and we work on this, but there is also our responsibility to feed from European destinations, to feed airports for long-haul destinations, long-haul journeys, because it's not about reducing travels, it's about having the most sustainable way of traveling where it suits. So that's what we're doing, working also, for instance, you may have seen that we're working with KLM between Brussels and Schiphol to reduce the number of flights so that their customers, KLM customers, go from Brussels to Schiphol by train and then fly overseas by KLM from Schiphol to anywhere. So this is what we're working on. This is what we need to have the new standards defined with public authorities, stakeholders, and so on, really to push these boundaries and think different about model shift.
Thanks. Maybe turning to the world of elderly care homes, which is completely different, I'd like to actually introduce Christine and ask, do you think actually the regulatory framework, and maybe you can spend a quick moment explaining what an EHPAD is, but do you think the regulatory framework is adapted for EHPAD to address the upcoming ecologic and demographic changes that will be arriving in the short and medium term? Oh.
Good question. Happy to share this moment with Gwendoline and Marie-Ange, clearly. Yes, EHPAD, that means nursing home, in fact. In English, I think it's the best translation. So that's specific facilities dedicated to people over 85 years old. I heard a lot about transportation, motorways, carbon footprint, etc., this morning. I just would like to share with you a few figures regarding people. I will remain in France because we are in Paris today. France has today about 67 million people, including 2.3 million people over 85 years. In 2050, it's tomorrow or after tomorrow, it would be nearly 5 million. From 2.3 million to 5 million people over 85 years. So yes, we have to face in emergency, I would say an ecological or environmental transition, but we will have also to manage within 2050 a huge demographic transition. And it's also an emergency for me because it has to be prepared. Today, 600,000 people are living in a nursing home in France and are accommodated in our specific facilities. In 2050, it will be nearly 1 million. I hope you can imagine investment needed to cover such an increase within the offer. What is our mission today? It's to ensure both, I would say, physical, mental, and I will add social well-being for our main stakeholders. That means elderly people, residents, their relatives, but also our teams. What are our duties today? To regain the confidence of the French population. And I'm talking about short term regarding your question, because you know the reputation issue we faced in France. It's specific, yes, but it appeared by the past in other countries. So permanently, we use to keep and to fuel the trust of the population. What can we do? Increasing transparency and sharing quality evaluation permanently. Second duty, we need to recruit and to retain people. by improving quality of life at work and adapt our training policy. Third duty, we need to invest and to continue to innovate, to adapt our offer to new generations, the famous, with bracket, baby boomers, and to, of course, to participate to the effort on carbon transition. I just want to underline, because we are here in Bercy, a specific scheme, very innovative, put in place in 2019 in France with a Loi Pact. This is the mission-led company, you know. You have the equivalent in Italy, and for American people, you know, maybe B Corp company or benefit companies. That's the way for a management to keep, I would say, a roadmap and to have a clear framework with a full transparency for companies such as a sector impacted by controversies. And we are happy to be a mission-led company. And I would like to underline that this type of scheme could be enlarged to the European countries as a whole, because for groups such as Colisée, investing in France, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Belgium, it's sometimes difficult to explain this scheme. So I hope that this typical French innovation that makes sense for industries such as nursing homes, nurseries, education, I would say social infrastructure as a whole, could have a great success for the future in Europe and maybe outside of Europe one day or another.
Thank you, Christine. Maybe turning back actually to Marie-Ange and going maybe in a little bit more detail, can you think of actually, or could you describe what you see as some of the key initiatives that are needed to ensure the energy transition objectives? And also, what sort of investment would you see as needed, either on the public or private side?
So maybe first element of answer is we should make our public transport appealing and attractive. What it means having the right offer. Gwendoline was mentioning growing the offer. At least we need to have the offer because the first element which is looked by passengers is how speed they are going to be able to get the place they want to be. So first is to increase the offer. Second is to make the offer more appealing, safer, cleaner. Nobody is asking about cheaper. Usually people ask for more frequent, more reliable, cleaner, safer, with Wi-Fi on board, air conditioning, of course. All these elements of comfort, which are key to convince people to drop their cars. Today, 40% of the trips which are made by individual cars are below 3 kilometers. So it's remain a very short distance. It means also that we have this capability to make this shift from individual cars to public transport. So first element is to make our public transport more appealing and more attractive. How we can do that? I was saying more offers, which means more infrastructure, so more financing. But not only a question of money, it's also a question of sometimes simplification of some elements or some arbitration. For instance, in the space, can we get dedicated lanes for buses or specific priorities and green lights? So all these elements, which are how we live all together in the public space, can be facilitated to support the public transport. So it's a second element, not only a financial one, but I would say a kind of regulatory one or decision by a city or by a region or by a government to change some elements of co-live on the public space. And we have a lot of other elements of regulations which could help, of course, to facilitate the energy transition of the sector, to simplify, for instance. Today, it's kind of a nightmare to manage the coexistence of various energies for an operator and for public transport authorities. So how can we simplify from a regulation point of view, even the energy transition? We were talking about, in the previous panel, they were talking about the energy by itself, trying to simplify some rules in order to be able, for instance, to put panels on bus depots, or a lot of elements of regulation and a lot of elements of financing should help to build a more attractive and more frequent and broader public transport.
Thank you, Marie-Ange. Maybe turning a similar question to Gwendoline, do you think actually the investments that are made on the public side are sufficient to ensure the complete shift to long distance trains? And what sort of investments do you see ongoing in the future are really needed to achieve these objectives?
Well, I think we have definitely a growth challenge. And this growth, because the willingness to travel sustainably on long distance is there. The market is growing, the demand is high, and we do have a growth challenge. And this growth challenge definitely needs investments. And it needs investment in infrastructure, both on network, railways, and on stations. On networks, do you know that northern Brussels, so to go from Brussels to Amsterdam, it means that's the route we are going on with our Eurostar trains from London to Amsterdam, or from Paris, Brussels to Amsterdam. There's no capacity left on peak hours. It means that before 2040, what they say 2040, 2050, we cannot add one train northern Brussels, either on the way to Amsterdam or on the way back. So it means there is a strong infrastructure investment need in Belgium for Infrabel on this specific. It's small. It's between 4 and 10 kilometers. It's small. But without this, we cannot develop further trains to and from Amsterdam. So this is the infrastructure network investment needs. Let's talk about stations. I'm sure for those who have taken a Eurostar to London that you know how amazing it is to cross the border in Paris Nord. I don't think there are many other places in which it's such a few square meters you can cross a border. And Paris Nord, every day, it's 1,200 passengers per hour crossing this border. So some people say you are making miracles. Almost what I tell to my staff all the days is we are making the impossible possible, and it's a day-to-day business. And yes, we need investments for stations. I just gave you the example of Paris Nord, but we have exactly the same issue in St. Pancras, in Amsterdam, and in Brussels. So it's about how, I would say, public and private, because it's also a matter of operators. It's not only a matter of infrastructure station managers. It's also how do we, collectively, operators and infrastructure station managers, how do we invest, how do we organize? But you cannot say, we want to develop sustainable travel, we want to develop long-haul European sustainable travel without working on stations. Stations and the way they are integrated in the global city is really a key subject for us. And the third topic, but it's still about frontiers, it's still about borders, is having resources on border policies. Because once again, we have now, well, we have the tunnel, which is a specific border, but now it's a bit different to cross the border to and from the UK post-Brexit. So we also need resources innovative digital ways to cross the border. So these are, yes, investments are needed, but each of us, I mean, operators and public authorities have their own responsibility in this. And as you understand, we are pushing the walls.
Thanks, Gwendoline. Christine, do you think actually in achieving the objectives that are necessary for this demographic, ecological change, do you think that there is actually a sufficient harmonization or collaboration at the national, local, social security levels? Is there a kind of a good harmony of these? And maybe a second question, if I can add, do you think that we are getting the best balance of private to public EHPADs? And as consumers, are we getting the best kind of balance of investment between the private and public?
Thank you. Let's start with the second question. The balance, I would say, not only in France, is quite well put in place. To make short the story, we have 50% of our revenues coming from government or local authorities, depending on the framework in each country, and the remaining 50% are out of pocket of our clients. When I say out of pocket of our clients, it could be the resident, the family, or a familial house that has been sold to finance for this year's in facilities. So it's not so bad, 50-50. I don't know if it's really scientific, but it's the case quite everywhere. Just to give you two numbers, I will come back in France again. 15 billion euros will be necessary by end of 2030 just to renovate the public nursing homes. 50 billion euros. 15 billion euros additionally will be necessary just to create the number of solutions for elderly people if we do not want to have people in hospitals or alone without any appropriate solution at home. So 15 additional billion of euros will be necessary by end of 2030. That means altogether 30 billion of euros necessary by end of 2030. So I hope we will continue to collaborate between the public and the private to create the solutions for these elderly people. So first question, is it sufficient and is it well anticipated? I'm not sure, to be honest, because we are working on annual plan. In this country, you know perfectly that the budget is voted at the end of the year for the next year. So when you have to prepare such a transition on such a long time, you need a contract of, I would say, a multi-year contract, just to be sure that as operator, as investor, we will have the safety, the legal security, relative stability within the fundings to invest for the next coming year. So we are a bit frustrated with this annual debate because there is always another priority. It could be for army, it could be for education, it could be for ecological transition, and trust me, I'm convinced that we have to finance also the transition and to manage our carbon emissions. But at the end of the day, elderly people, demographic transition, it's always the last topic reviewed by the government and where we have concrete decisions. Last point, sorry, but to come back to what said Marie-Ange regarding our carbon footprint, it's exactly the same. In our facilities, a large part is linked to transportation because people have to commute, workers have to come within our facilities. We cannot offer remote. I hope that you can imagine that. Families are happy to meet elderly in our facilities, but it's only the second source of carbon emission. The first one is food. I know it could be surprising, but for us, the fight for the future will be how to find the solution to feed these people thinking that meat, because meat is the first source of carbon emission within food, meat was a luxury product by the past, and we have to change progressively the mindset and to find solutions to explain that to manage the carbon footprint, we'll have to adapt our food for the future.
Thanks, Christine. Marie-Ange, what do you think can be done to help greenify the different modes of transport to ensure that, say, public transport becomes a dominant mode of transport over cars and planes? And as a second point, how has inflation impacted the affordability of public transport?
Two different questions. For the first question, at Keolis, we strongly believe that we have to manage various modes of transport. So Keolis is number one in terms of automatic metro and tramway worldwide, but we manage also cycling. In France, we are number 2 in providing cycling to municipalities. So we believe that we have to take into account how people want to have the right of mobility in a given territory, and mixing tram, metro, bus, individual cars, of course, walking, cycling. So all these elements should work together, and it's clear that depending on the situation, you are not going to use the same mode. And to give you one or two examples, to say that, for instance, cars or cycling are not appropriate, we managed the Football World Cup in Doha quite recently. We moved people from the usual number of people in our metro in Doha was 100,000 people a day. And we move up to 800,000 people a day. Multiply by 8 the number of people per day in the metro. You cannot manage these people by cycling, walking, by individual cars. No way, no way. And I could give other examples with the Rugby World Cup in France. We were operating 3 stadiums. We were operating public transport for 3 stadiums in France, Lille, Lyon, and Bordeaux. You cannot, 50% of the people who decided to attend the match in the stadium cannot come with their individual cars. So we have to always think the various modes, and we are not going to drop individual cars, but we need to always think about what is the right balance and the right mix of modes in a given territory. So that's really the way we try to think mobility at Keolis. So we could spend a lot of time, but for the sake of time, maybe let's try to answer your second question. Inflation. I think it was interesting because previously Gwendoline mentioned inflation as an element of thinking infrastructure. It's true that for the past, at least for the 10 past years, we manage infrastructure and public mobility without having inflation, without facing inflation. So we need to change at the moment, at least since beginning of last year, we started to think a slightly different way. Most of our contracts in our model are in fact benefit from indexations, so from our clients. And I would say it's quite normal because we cannot, as a pure operator, take the risk of the energy pricing or all these elements. What we provide the expertise, the capability to recruit, to manage the operations, but as we are a provider for public transport authorities, they usually take the big part of the risk in terms of inflation, whatever the origin of the inflation. So that's an element, a first element of answer. The second point is how inflation could change the usual balance between the three ways of financing public transport and infrastructure in general. We have these famous rules of the 3T: taxes, tariffs, and transfer. And we need to maintain always this balance, even when you are in the period of inflation. We need to have this right balance of the three sources of financing of infrastructure. So difficult to give you a very precise answer because each case is quite different in fact, depending also on the length of your contract. We manage in our case contracts which are 10-year contract, but we have also 4-year contract. So in this case, you do not deal with inflation in the same way, but it's clear that we have two key major elements of concern, of monitoring, which are wages and energy. They represent 70% of our cost. So we are very, very careful on these two aspects to be sure that we have an alignment between our resources and our cost in these two areas, which are key for our P&L and sustainability of our financial statements.
Thanks, Marie-Ange. I mean, a sort of a similar question to you, Gwendoline. There have been recent initiatives in Spain and Germany to actually ensure low-cost regional train transport. What do you think of these initiatives, and how could we actually absorb this development in terms of Eurostar?
Well, I think, as I said, that as growth is our main challenge, these initiatives allow to even grow the potential market share of railways. And when you look at what happened in France with low-cost railways, the WIGO, it really allowed the global model shift, the global market share to grow. So this is a new, I would say, the new environment in which Eurostar is going to deal with, and everything which is good for railways and for sustainable travel is good for us. But what I would say is that to face this growth, what is key is innovation. Innovation in terms of low-cost services, innovation in terms of services, and for us at Eurostar, innovation, as I said, in the way we organize, complementarity, cooperation with airlines. It's how do we think different, this relationship with airlines? How do we make sure that when overseas travelers come to Europe, they travel with us, they travel with Eurostar? So this is in terms of service innovation, way of traveling innovations. And it's also about digital innovation. The way we create value further for customers, the way we cross borders differently. I talked about the borders and the Eurostar terminals a few moments ago. It's also, we have an initiative in London which is called Smart Check. You cross the border, you exit UK with facial recognition. So it's not science fiction. So it's this innovation, well, my belief is that in a few, I would say, a few decades, not in a few years, but in a few decades, we will cross borders with facial recognition. So this is strong innovation that we are trying to push and that will enable this growth and this new normal, new sustainable world for travel.
Thanks, Gwendoline. Maybe keeping on the same theme of innovation, Christine, how do you see actually innovation impacting on the new developments like at-home care? I mean, is innovation even important for EHPADs?
Before innovation, few words about inflation.
Yes, actually,
Thank you.
and maybe actually for inflation, you know, how does it impact EHPADs, and does it even matter?
Yeah, no, it's really an issue because when we have chosen the countries where we operate, we always choose model with the right balance between public and private money, with a model where each citizen has the right to access to healthcare services, whatever could be the status, you know, private or public. We thought it was the same in France, but it's not exactly the case. For 2 years, we face a huge squeeze regarding inflation. We estimate that it could be by 6%. Due to the fact that wages, as Marie-Ange said, food and energy prices increased a lot. And it should have been compensated on wages by subsidized, you know, because when you inflate, when you increase the salaries of civil servants within hospitals or public nursing homes, you have to fund the private facilities at the same time by the same amount. But it's not the case anymore. So I'm a bit worried, to be honest, in this country because we are progressively changing the model. That means that universality of the social security is not anymore ensured. That means that for our companies, for our investors, it's not exactly the same rule. The game has changed. So I just want to insist a little bit, because if we want to keep this freedom of choice for everyone, for you, for your families, by the future, we have to keep this scheme by giving the same amount of money, the same amount of subsidies, whatever, for care, of course, whatever could be the status of the facility or of the operator. So let's come back to innovation. Being honest, our main issue today is regarding human resources. As you know, it's difficult to recruit and to retain. I hope it's the same for you, or I think it's the same for you. What we would like to do is to use innovation to give more time to our employees, to be close to residents and patients. Just take one example. We are using artificial intelligence for medicines, you know, to double check that the treatment is real appropriate, that there is nothing to avoid regarding a specific patient or a specific resident. And it's really a gain in terms of time for pharmacists, for nurses, and the time they don't have to double-check medicines, treatments. It's time to deliver link and to be more with the patients and the residents. We have various solutions like that. The second one could be robotization. Robotization for cleaning, that's simple, but if we are a little bit pushy on this type of solution, it could be the way for us to let added value to employees and to keep low added value tasks to robots. So various solutions like that are in place and are increasing, but I have to say that we have to progress quickly on that.
Thanks, Christine. I see that we have very little time left, and I did promise actually to allow maybe a couple of questions. So do we have any brave soul that's willing to actually ask a question? Please, go ahead.
Hi. Thank you very much, and congratulations on the panel. Very feminist, so perfect for ESG. In terms, Gwendoline, I guess for you, in terms of growth, which you mentioned as a challenge, have you envisioned, going to the US versus remaining in Europe now that Brexit has created a non-European, place for you? The US has a lot of needs in terms of infrastructure. CDPQ is one of the major actors, and would CDPQ accompany Eurostar and to the US? I mean, Amtrak needs a lot, and the rest of the US as well. So
I will let Gwendoline respond, and then maybe Marie-Ange can talk about the new initiative in Canada, which is not the US, but it's the same side of the ocean.
I think that Marie-Ange can better answer than me.
Okay, I will let actually Marie-Ange answer this one.
maybe Keolis has already activities in North America in operation of train. The main one currently is in Boston, around all the commuting trains in Boston. But we are working on a very emblematic project in Canada and in Quebec, which is the high-frequency rail, which is the perfect example of a project which can change a given territory, because if we are able to develop and then to operate, and CDPQ is clearly the developer of the project, and Keolis could be the operator of the project in a second step. If you can have a high-frequency rail along the coast, it's going to simplify, remove a number of cars, simplify life. It's going to change, fully change the life, the daily life of the people living along the coast in Quebec. So it's a major project, complex one, because you have all the aspects of a big infrastructure project. Of course, you need to simplify and find rules from a landscape point of view, from a technical point of view, from a financing point of view, from a business model point of view as well. So Vivian is modest because at the end of the day, it's more a CDPQ project, and as an operator, we would be very pleased to operate. We provide some advice as an operator, how to, in the future, operate in the proper way, and Keolis would be also pleased to be an equity investor in this project, but only a quite small one in comparison of the full project. So it's very interesting project because, and it's really about infrastructure, is how you can change the total face of a territory thanks to an infrastructure project.
And I think it's a really interesting project because we did the same with the REM in Quebec, where actually CDPQ was the developer of long transport trains, sort of like the RER in France. And in that case, as in this case for the high-frequency train between Montreal and Toronto, we definitely recognized that there is a huge wealth of knowledge and specialty in France. So we worked in recruiting our teams very heavily there's a lot of French know-how actually in the REM system. And in this high-frequency train, I mean, we sort of joke, and I'm sorry if there are any Canadians in the audience, that in the train system for passenger transport in Canada, it'd be faster to run alongside the train than actually get in the train. And so there's a recognition that we really can benefit from the expertise of Keolis and also SNCF, which is our co-shareholder in Keolis, that there's a huge wealth of knowledge in France. So we definitely benefit from that because it's simply not as developed in Canada. It's just not an area that has become really developed. So high-frequency trains, high-speed trains, the Canadians are looking to Europe. So I think it's kind of quite the theme. And one of our CEOs must actually catch an urgent train on the Eurostar to be in London, so I will actually wrap this up. I've been told to be very disciplined, so I will be very disciplined, but thank you very much for attending. I'm very proud of this panel, so hopefully you've enjoyed this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the moderator and to the panelists. Thank you for this session, the second plenary session. And we're going to continue. I'm advising you to check the program and to see what's coming up. And now I'm inviting on stage the moderator, Jean Bensay, Director of Infra French Treasury, and the speakers for the plenary session number 3, Energy Transition, Defining the New Playground. You can come on stage, please.